Hey guys, this is Anne-Marie, the Anti-HR HR Lady. And you may recall that I made a video a couple weeks ago where I talked about the top five employers, the worst employers, top five worst employers identified by me through my practice in the last year with clients, both talking to clients and potential clients and looking at the sectors that they were coming from. I did a video where I ranked and identified the top five worst employers just based on feedback from my clients. And the number one worst employer was nonprofit organizations. And some people may have found that surprising and some people may not have. But I had promised that I would do a video to talk a little bit more about why I think that nonprofit organizations have turned out to be one of the worst sectors and one of the worst types of employers for employees generally, and specifically for Black people, especially Black women. And I speak about this not just through the experience and feedback from my clients and potential clients, but also through my own personal experience because I worked in the nonprofit sector for almost 20 years of my work life. And for most of the years that I worked as an executive and in the management, I was in the nonprofit sector. So I can actually speak about this from experience, not just the experience of my clients. And in my opinion, the nonprofit sector is especially a difficult work environment for Black employees, and a lot of Black employees experience discrimination in these types of work environments. And I want to talk a little bit about why, in my opinion, this happens so often and why this happens, because I think a lot of people who work in these sectors actually expect to not run into these kinds of things because of the perception that they initially have. So I want to talk a little bit about that so that people can have more awareness when they pursue careers in the nonprofit sector. And I'm talking about across the sectors. You know, even the nonprofit sector has segments to it. There's international development, where I spent a lot of time. There's client service based nonprofit organizations, places that give out food, that serve underserved communities is what they always like to say they're serving. Even international development, they claim to be providing services to countries and communities that have either been victimized or harmed by the policies of the United States government and the West, or otherwise going through things. And the nonprofit organizations will say they're going in to help, and oftentimes that's not exactly what happens. Same with domestic nonprofit organizations. Some of them are organizations that serve women. They're organizations that serve the homeless. They're organizations that serve communities that are predominantly Black and brown people. Let's talk a little bit about why nonprofits can be such challenging work environments for Black employees, especially Black women. So one of the main reasons that I think that nonprofits can be such challenging work environments for Black people, especially Black women, is the idealistic paradox, in that people take these jobs because they're idealistic. They want to do good in the world. They think that this is an organization, this is an environment where they're going to work with people who also want to do good in the world. And therefore, they expect that they're going to treat each other well, because the missions of these organizations are always very lofty and people-centered. So a lot of times when people take these jobs, they're coming in with certain expectations, and then they're deeply disappointed when they find that the mission that the organization has does not live up to the way that the organization is managed, and that the way that employees, especially employees of color and specifically Black people, are treated inside of the organization. The second issue is racism in progressive spaces. So a lot of people go into these organizations and consider themselves to be liberal and progressive, specifically the white people that go into these organizations and the ones that are running these organizations. And they really believe themselves to be progressive and liberal, and therefore they have a real hard time recognizing their own racial blind spots and their own racism. And for the black people and brown people that come into these environments, they're coming in expecting not to have to deal with issues of race because of the mission of the organization, because of the way that the white people that they work with present themselves in interviews, etc. And then when they get into the space, they find that they have to deal with the same things they dealt with in the for-profit sector. Martin Luther King talked extensively in his letters from Birmingham jail about the issues around dealing with white progressives and how dangerous they can be and how problematic they can be. And it's the same thing that you run into when you're in the nonprofit environments, is that people present themselves as being progressive and forward thinking, but they're just as racist as the people who they believe to be non-progressive and non-forward thinking, right? And sometimes even more so, because they're so busy trying to convince themselves that they have no racism, that when you present to them their own racism, their reactions can be extremely harsh and retaliatory towards you as a person of color or a black person, especially black women. When we raise these issues in these environments, the way that we are treated and how quickly the retaliation begins can be like mind-boggling, because you're thinking, oh, this person, is progressive and they're liberal, but that really doesn't make a difference. The third thing is, in the nonprofit sector, there's a significant degree of gaslighting and tone policing. And I believe that part of the reason why there's so much gaslighting and tone policing in these environments is because many of them are run by white women. And white women, on top of their racism and the issues around whiteness and white supremacy, period, are very committed to fake kindness. They like you to pretend that everything is fine even when it's not. Fake niceness, I also like to call it. They're very committed to that. And so when you go into these environments and you're not willing to go along with that, you're a problem. And people will try to convince you, when you raise issues of discrimination and other workplace issues like bullying and so on, that what is very clear to you isn't really happening. There'll be a lot of gaslighting telling you that you're the reason and you're the problem when you try to raise these issues. And there's a lot of tone policing about, a lot of times you'll raise a very valid issue, but then they'll attack the way you presented it because they don't want to deal with the substance of what you are raising, especially if it's around issues of racism and discrimination in the workplace of any kind, or any kind of issue anyway that goes against what they want to present, right? And people will smile and engage in, the fake niceness while they're plotting your demise behind your back, all the while trying to convince you that what you know is happening really isn't happening. So there's a significant amount of that in nonprofit work environments that also make those environments particularly challenging for Black people, especially for Black women. Number 5, and the last very problematic reason why I think nonprofits are particularly problematic employers for Black people, and especially Black women, is the psychological impact of everything that I just mentioned. When you're in an environment where you expected to have a different experience, where you expected that because of the mission and because of the way people presented themselves as being progressive and liberal, and because of all of the gaslighting and tone policing, it really can have a really deleterious or very bad impact on your psychological well-being. And a lot of people that come out of these environments, including myself, take a really long time to recover from the experience because it was so the opposite of what you expected, right? And why you went into working in this sector. And it's so deeply disappointing also. And then you will also often find in these environments, as I said, are very female heavy, especially white women, but all women, that some of the people who will come for you will be people that look like you, or people that are also ethnic minorities who are used by the leadership, who's usually white, to do the dirty work. That's a big thing that happens in the nonprofit sector. And that is also deeply psychologically damaging and harmful. So you mix all these things together and you have a work environments that are very, very problematic for Black people, especially all employees, but Black people especially, Black employees, and particularly Black women, because we are so disproportionately represented in the nonprofit sector. There's so many of us working in the nonprofit sector. So In conclusion, I hope that this has kind of illuminated why I identify the nonprofit sector as being a particularly problematic employer, and why so many of my past, present, and potential clients have come to me from that sector. So, what can you do if you are a person who is in this sector and you feel that you are experiencing racism, just straight up racism, or as well as if you are also dealing with tone policing and micromanagement and the gaslighting and all of those things? The number one thing I would say is always very important to understand what discrimination is, understand and know whether you belong to any protected classes. I've talked about that lots of times, whether you race, race, ethnicity, whether you are a woman, gender, whether you're a member of the LGBT community, whether age might be coming into play, whether you have a disability which is visible or invisible. All of these things are important, whether you belong to a religion that is not the majority religion in the United States. All of these things are important for you to know and understand so that you can put what you might be experiencing into context, right, along those different protected classes. The other thing is, as I always tell people, it's important to recognize discrimination in your workplace. It's also important to document discrimination in your workplace, and then it's important to understand and form a strategy and a plan for how you're going to raise these issues and communicate them and about them with human resources, and being very clear on what the outcome is that you're seeking before you go to human resources to raise these things, and then strategically knowing how and when to ask for an exit from this work environment if it is in fact discriminatory and hostile and toxic. So the first thing is really understanding those things that I talked about, and I teach in my replay of my live course about how to ask your employer for an exit from a discriminatory hostile work environment and actually get it with cash. I teach people how to ask their employer to pay them to leave discriminatory hostile workplaces. And this is what I teach my clients all the time, people that come to work with me. This is what I teach them to do and how to navigate these things and walk away with a check in many, many cases, and how to hold employers accountable for their behavior and how to understand their workplace rights. So if you feel that this is happening to you, especially in the nonprofit sector, it's really important to know how to respond to it and to respond to it effectively. You will find in this sector that there will be a lot of denial and gaslighting and refusal to acknowledge the behavior, but you have to remember that your objective is not for them to admit that they did wrong. It's to hold them accountable and make them pay for it, whether they want to ever admit it or not. So if you feel that this is happening to you, make sure that you are documenting it effectively. Book a discovery call with me. You can do that on my website, or just go straight to my website and grab access to the online course and educate yourself, and then map your strategy for exiting. You do not need to stay in these environments. I don't care how much commitment you have to the mission of the company and how important it is to you to help the communities that the company might be claiming that it's serving. Don't allow any employer to break you emotionally and mentally. And that's what's happening to a lot of the people that come to me, because they're trying to do their best and they can't understand why what's happening to them is happening to them. And it can have really negative impacts on your mental health. So I really encourage you that regardless of what sector, but especially if you're in the nonprofit sector and you believe that you are being discriminated against, please take action. Don't just sit and take it. And if you don't know how to take action, please reach out to me on my website, the AntiHR Lady.com. And I'm happy to talk to you. I'm happy to help you. And there are lots of resources on my website as well. Please always remember that HR is not your enemy, but they're definitely not your friend, but I am. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.